evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the launch of the Society of Biology. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nancy Rothwell and the first president of the Society. I'm just going to speak very briefly, just to give you a little bit of background to the Society, which was officially formed in October 2009, after what was quite a long and at times rather tortuous gestation. The Institute of Biology and the Biosciences Federation came together at that time, after working together increasingly over previous years. The IOB, as it was generally known, was formed in 1950 and awarded a Royal Charter in 1979, and that Royal Charter was transferred to the Society of Biology. The Biosciences Federation has a rather different history. In the late 1990s, a group of learned societies broke away and formed what was then called the United Kingdom Life Sciences Committee, believing that they wanted to focus their attention on academic matters. That progressed for a number of years until I became president in 2002, and it was a very short-lived presidency. And the reason was because we decided fairly quickly that we had to try to bring together the UK Life Sciences Committee and the Institute of Biology. So remember, that was just 8 years ago. We then formed the Biosciences Federation with a closer partnership with the IOB, which was then a member of the Biosciences Federation. It took another 6 or 7 years before we got to the point of truly coming together as the Society of Biology and creating what we believe is a single voice for biology. During that time, we had great support from many people, and actually we had a fantastic independent chair in Sir Brian Heap, who allowed those discussions to proceed in a gentlemanly manner. So what really changed things for both organisations was the realisation that neither would be giving anything up, but both would be gaining something from becoming a single organisation, the Society of Biology. There was an interim council formed from 5 members of the IOB Council, 5 members of the BSF, and 5 new members, although we are now starting to bring in new members and turn over that membership. We had an interim period when the Society, as it was being formed, had in effect several people running them. We have to give great thanks to the former chief executives of the 2 organisations, that is Alan Malcolm and Richard Dyer, and I would particularly like to thank the last president of the IOB, Raymond Dweck, and his council members, who effectively stood back to allow the new organisation to be formed. So the council began quite a long time before we were officially a Society of Biology. But I think most importantly was the appointment of our first chief executive, Mark Downes, who so elegantly demonstrated the fire exits. The new organisation is an interesting one because it's different to some in that it retains many individual members from the IOB, but also a significant number of member organisations. I was interviewed earlier today for a radio programme, and interestingly, one of the questions was, why has it taken so long? And I think one of the reasons it's taken so long because there were so many strong organisations in biology, and we had to acknowledge that, as we still do, that they all have an individual place, but together they can work much better on many of our activities and goals. So now we have about 80,000 members, many organisations that are members, and we have 2 independent colleges representing those individuals and those organisations. And if you want to know anything at all about the regulations, I'll refer you immediately to David Coates, who is probably the only person amongst us who actually understands them. So the goal of the new organisation is to support and promote all aspects of biology. That isn't simply biological research, biological teaching in universities, but also in schools at all levels. It's the amateur biologist, the interested biologist. It's everybody who wants to do something for biology. This, I think, is extremely important because one of the very first decisions we made as an interim council was, what do we want to be? And the answer was inclusive. That is, we did not treat anybody differently if they were an eminent professor of biology or a young school kid who really was fascinated by the world of biology. It's on that basis that we chose the 3 speakers this evening. We wanted to represent the highest levels of academic achievement in biology, biology for the wider public, and young scientists in biology who are interested in disseminating what we do. So we have tonight as a main speaker Sir Paul Nurse, who will be well known to many of you, followed by David Attenborough, even probably better known to you, and perhaps a little lesser known, but not for long, Dr. Cerri Harrop, who is a young postdoc who won our Science Communicator of the Year award last year. So first I'm going to ask Paul if he will come and present the lecture. He's going to talk to us about biology in the 21st century. How could you not know Paul if you know anything about biology? Nobel Prize winner, great spokesperson for biology, winner of so many awards, and in fact gave a fantastic lecture just last night. Paul, welcome and thank you for coming.
Well, you know, I couldn't think of a better place to begin the Society of Biology than the Fishmonger's Hall. I mean, fish are very important, and I think that's very suitable. David Attenborough was chatting to me just before I came up and wanted to know whether the two societies had got yet beyond courtship. And we decided certainly copulation had taken place, and I think actually we're seeing birth clearly taking place. I want to begin by congratulating both the Biosciences Federation and the Institute of Biology on this merger to make the Society of Biology. This unification is very important for biology in Great Britain. And it's in fact this topic of unification which will be a strand throughout my talk today about biology in the 21st century. In the 1960s, when I was at school and then an undergraduate, there had just been a very significant unification in biology. The separate life science disciplines that many of you remember, those classical university departments of botany, zoology, physiology, and the like, had been unified into the biological sciences. And this unification reflected the realization that there was a unity of life, that life in all its extraordinary forms had a basic unitary plan. And this was a great step forward. But unfortunately, within a decade, there was a great step backwards. Another schism in biology occurred, and that was to separate the molecular biologists, and often the cell and developmental biologists and even the geneticists, from those biologists interested in organisms, those biologists studying ecology, evolution, ethology, those scientists with perhaps more natural history origins, sometimes called the fur and feather brigade in parts of the profession. This schism was a great mistake. And it was a great mistake because it separated the understanding of life in molecular and cellular terms from what life is, which is, of course, the organism. But we're seeing steps being taken now that I think will heal this separation. I'm very optimistic about it. Molecular biologists are becoming increasingly aware that what they are trying to do, which is to generate a molecular understanding of life, and that's what I do, it will only be possible if it's seen in the context of evolution, ecology, and often ethology. I call it the 3 E's. We need to return those centrally to biology. About 50 years ago, Theodosis Dobzhansky, who used to be a professor of the institution I'm now president, Rockefeller University, understood this perfectly when he said, "Nothing makes sense in biology except in the light of evolution." I remember reading this sentence when I was 15 or 16 years of age at school. I would extend that today to nothing makes sense in biology except in the light of evolution, ecology, and ethology. And this is my first main message for today. Now, I want to turn to a number of topics. I want to talk about biological research and what I think research may bring in the 21st century, particularly in the area of specific interest to me. I want also to talk about the funding of research, and then later to teaching of biology and to the public engagement of science with the public. Let me begin with research. Now, the essential aim of all biological research really is quite simply stated. It's to understand the nature of life and how life works. It is, frankly, one of the most exciting intellectual endeavours for humankind. It would lead to a better understanding of life, of ourselves, and of the world around us. It is a great cultural adventure. But in thinking about research, we need to remember that society supports this research endeavour not simply to satisfy the curiosity of scientists, but because they also want science to benefit humanity. They're interested, in addition to the cultural advances, in creating wealth and improving health and enhancing the quality of life. And this is an important issue when I talk about research funding, which I will do a little later. Now, where do I think the great advances in 21st century biology, particularly molecular and cellular biology, where do I think that going, at least in the first few decades? Well, I think we're at a very interesting juncture. Molecular biology and the molecular biology and genetic revolutions of the 20th century have given us a very powerful paradigm with which to work. And if we can place it in the proper context of organisms, then this will greatly improve our understanding of life. Now, I think key to this understanding will be information and the management of information. And this is my second main message I'd like to convey today. Francis Crick, that great molecular biologist who, of course, was together with Watson and Wilkins and Franklin involved in the structure of DNA and what it meant for heredity, argued that the understanding of life requires investigations in the flows that take place in living organisms of matter, of energy, and of information. And the greatest of these is information. Sounds rather biblical, of course, the way that I said that. He didn't quite say it like that. Now, as always, or nearly always, Francis Crick was right. We need, in our biological investigations, to follow the flow of information. We need to be able to describe how living organisms work in terms of the management of information, both at the level of cells and higher levels, organs, organisms, populations, the biosphere, evolution. At all levels of biology, information and how it's managed is critical. Now, the simplest level of biological organization, where you see all the properties of life, is, of course, the cell. And it is at that level where I think we can expect the most rapid progress over the next decades. The cell, as the simplest entity exhibiting the properties of life, is a good place to start. And I think our objective should be, and I think we will be successful at this, is to translate the descriptions of the myriad of chemical reactions and interactions that go on within a cell into a different language, not simply describing the chemistry, but one that describes the flow of information going on and how that's managed. And what I mean by that is, how is information being gathered? How is that information being stored? How is it being processed and integrated? How is it being used to generate the higher level phenomena which are typical of biological systems? Those phenomena in a cell, for example, that lead to homeostasis, to reproduction, to the ability to sense the environment, to the spatial and temporal organization of the cell, integrating all of these into the phenomena that we understand of life. Now, proper understanding will also require analysis of information management in more complex systems beyond the cell, in the interactions of one cell with another, in tissues, in organs, in organisms and above. And this will further unify the biological sciences, because I believe there will be common principles underpinning the understanding of information and its management in living systems which will be acting at all these levels. Now, if I'm sounding a little bit abstract, I want to give you two simple, well-known examples to show you how I'm thinking and how I think we should think about these problems, both well-known in molecular biology. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is the beautiful molecule of heredity. But DNA is not beautiful simply because it has a wonderful shape, the double helix. Its beauty for biology lies in understanding what the structure of that helix means in terms of information and its significance for heredity. When we understand that what DNA really is a digital information storage device, we understand that the focus on information explains genetics and explains heredity. This is the beauty of DNA, and it is the beauty that was understood by Crick, by Watson, and by Brenner. Another example of the importance of information is the regulation of gene transcription, seen for the first time with the beautiful analysis of the lac operon carried out by Jacob and Monod, describing the functioning of the lac operon in terms of molecular interactions between the DNA gene of the lac operon, between the RNA made by that gene, the subsequent enzymes, and their interactions with lactose and other lower molecular weight components. Understanding all those molecular interactions is not sufficient to understand the biological role. It's only when these interactions are connected together to form a negative feedback loop, as proposed by Jacob and Monod in the late 1950s, early 1960s, only then does it make sense. Once again, this is translating the chemistry, the biochemistry of the phenomena, into the management of information to generate the negative feedback loop. So what I'm arguing is that the same thinking that we associate with Crick, with Watson, with Brenner, with Jacob, with Monod, which occurred at the start of the molecular biology revolution, with its clear focus on information, that same thinking now needs to be applied throughout all of biology and everything that is happening in biology, starting, in my view, with the cell. And it is here, at least in my opinion, where we will see the great advances in the 21st century, with its great potential not only to understand life, but also for improvements in medicine, the improvement of health, the management of our environment, and also of agriculture. So, biology and information. I think that's a very important message, particularly at this time. Now, this is research, but to carry out research, we need research funding. And as I've already indicated, the public do not fund research simply to indulge our curiosity. However, of course, indulging curiosity of creative scientists is in fact the best way to bring about high-quality research. And this represents one of the great dilemmas for research funding. Because we, that is those on the ground doing research, are stimulated by curiosity and wanting to know, but we are funded by others who actually want us to do something useful, to bring benefits for humanity. Both sides of this are reasonable. We can do best work when we are being creative, and also we have to produce something useful, because the benefits of research are real and tangible. That's why, in fact, we receive in biology and biomedicine such good support. And we can expect improvements in health and technology, agriculture, and the environment as a consequence. And I'm optimistic about this. It represents the views, of course, or reflects the views current in the Enlightenment and so central for science. The Enlightenment, which this movement in the 17th and 18th century, which can be summed up as arguing that it's the use of reason which brings about a better understanding of both ourselves and the universe around us, and with that better understanding will come improvements in the human condition. This, clearly stated in the 18th century, really drives our endeavour today. Now, our politicians and our scientific leaders want to achieve this, but they do not always go about it in the most sensible way. And the latest approach, which distresses me, is rather crude, and it's all to do with impact. Many in this room will now be aware that there are discussions in grant applications that have to give an estimate of the impact of the research supported. It seems pretty harmless. But it isn't harmless, it's simply a bad idea. The motivation for it is good, they're trying to solve a problem. The solution is bad. All that will happen if we adopt this proposal is that research grant applications will either invent impacts that have no meaning, or even worse, second or third-rate scientists will propose projects that sound as if they have good impacts, but in reality will lead to second or third-rate research. This simple way of addressing the problem is not appropriate. We need a more subtle approach. Now, the key issue is the one I've already mentioned. High-quality discovery research is usually carried out best by high-quality scientists driven by their curiosity. This is unfortunate for those trying to drive applications in scientific policy, but it is true, and we have to take account of it. Now, it's important to recognize that discovery research in biology is aimed at understanding very complicated problems. Biological research is difficult. Much of biology is not yet well understood for easy and successful application. Biology in its application is not like the Manhattan Project. It's not like landing on the moon. Getting to the moon depended on really quite well understood physics. It was mostly a matter of Newtonian physics combined with great engineering, a sense of purpose, and of course, a lot of money. In biology, to rush to translation with the apparent promise of impact may result in us getting lost in translation, if I can use a cinematic pun. I'm going to discuss this with a metaphor, because I don't actually have a solution to this problem, which I think is very significant. I want you all to imagine the scientific endeavor like a 19th century geographical exploration of the world. And I want you to imagine scientists as 19th century explorers. Now, society, working through the politicians and our scientific leaders, let's call it the Geographical Society of London, society should identify general areas of interest of importance to society. They should be defined rather broadly. Continuing with the explorer metaphor, these areas should be defined in broad geographical terms. The Antarctic, the Amazon basin, the African interior. What the Geographical Society should not be doing is identifying the specific Antarctic glacier that should be explored, which tributary of the Amazon you should be paddling up in your canoe, which part of the jungle you should be exploring. That is the job of the explorer on the ground. That is the scientist doing the work. What they need to be encouraged to do is to release their creative energies to find the right areas to explore, to locate those unknown boundaries of knowledge that are ripe to be pushed back. The job of scientific leaders and our political masters is to locate the continents, to identify the very finest scientific explorers, to give them the best tools for the job, and then let them get on with the exploration. So the job of scientific leaders and funding organizations for discovery research is not to micromanage, not to ask for false estimates of impact, not to establish milestones, not to design roadmaps. This is not appropriate for the creative discovery research at the frontiers of knowledge. In my view, biology research will prosper best and lead to better applications in the 21st century if it is this metaphor which is used to drive the discovery research endeavour. Now, this whole issue of impact, applications and driving what work should be done is in need of much better debate. This is a complex issue. I am a research scientist, but I'm also a research administrator and leader, and I wrestle with this problem all the time. So I do not think there are simple answers. But I do know that it will not be answered by a paragraph in a grant application estimating impact and determining 25% of the score that that grant is given. I do know that that is not appropriate. We need high-quality scientific leadership, not simply good managers, scientists who can lead and inspire to help us through this problem. It is not enough simply to ring-fence an area that needs pursuit. This always will run the danger of attracting the mediocre, because the mediocre will always follow where the money goes. We need scientific leaders who will inspire, who will excite the curiosity of investigators, who can argue why scientists might become interested in particular projects, so that they themselves are led by their own curiosity into looking at these problems and hopefully bringing the benefits to society. Now, research needs funding, and given that an election is only a couple of months away, it is important to extract from the political parties their policies on support for scientific research. Now, there are two contrasting issues I want to mention here relevant to biological research. One which I'm optimistic about, one which I'm rather worried about. First, the one I'm worried about. This is the planned cuts in university spending. There's been much debate in the media about the effects these cuts might have on the humanities, but they are damaging the sciences too. For over a decade, the present government has been highly supportive of science, and it would be a great shame if the planned cuts in university spending should reverse this trend, as it will undermine recent progress and the long-term future of science in the UK, including biology. This has to be a concern for all of us. In contrast, the more optimistic piece of news, and this is really good news, is that an exciting new biomedical research institute to be established in central London at St Pancras, which will be the biggest biomedical research institute in Europe. I call it the biomedical equivalent to CERN in Geneva. Today at 12:30, at a press conference, the Prime Minister announced £250 million, new pounds, to support this project. I was present at the press conference, and that's been promised. This is a new interdisciplinary biomedical research institute. It's called the UK Centre for Medical Research and Innovation. I chair the scientific planning committee for this project, and it's, for me at least, the most exciting biomedical research initiative in Europe for a generation. It will carry out the highest biomedical research of the highest quality, and most importantly, will help train scientists of the future and help place them elsewhere in the country, supporting the biomedical research endeavour throughout the UK. It will not be a stand-alone institute. It's part of its mission is to support universities making up the entire biomedical research endeavour, and I'm very excited about it. So, a good bit of news, a bit of news I'm not quite so happy about, which is the concerns over university funding. Now, with respect to the political parties and science funding, once again, the appropriate term is unification. It is so obvious that scientific research is essential for the future generation of wealth, for improvement of health, for the enhancement of the quality of life, as well as the cultural advances, that I urge all three parties to adopt a common, unified approach to fund research science adequately. The political parties have shown the way, in one sense, by the ex-Labour Science Minister, Lord Sainsbury, and the ex-Tory Science Minister, Lord Waldegrave, who have both worked together on a recent Royal Society report, The Scientific Century, Securing Our Future Prosperity. This report passionately argues for continued strong support for scientific research supporting, I should say, both the physical as well as the biological sciences. The physical sciences are indeed important to underpin future progress in the biological sciences. We should follow, or we should urge the political parties to follow the leadership of Lord Waldegrave and Lord Sainsbury. Because on the scale of government budgets, scientific research is not expensive, but it is the seed corn for our future prosperity. Now is not the time to burn that seed corn, and we should get all three political parties to agree on this. Then we can stop worrying about what's going to happen after the election. One more point from that Royal Society report, which I personally think is critical. I've argued that high-quality research relies on high-quality people. We really need to put great emphasis on investing in excellent people and maybe less on specific projects. We need to identify the best, equip them well, and let them get on with the job. Teaching. I'd like to say something about biology teaching. Now, it won't surprise you, given what I've already said, that I have been distressed by the separation in universities, particularly, between molecular and organismic biology teaching. This simply needs to be reversed. In the 21st century, we need to develop fully integrated biology courses, which do include all areas from molecules through to ecology, evolution, and ethology. We have to place the organism centrally in the teaching of all biology. Subsequently, we can specialize, but we have to understand the organism in biology. I have something else to say about teaching. I think there needs to be a greater focus in biology on great ideas. We biologists are a sad lot. We tend to like particulars. If we were a 19th century biologist, we would have counted the hairs on beetles' legs. If we are an ecologist, we might count the species and list the species in the habitat. If we're a molecular biologist, we like to sequence genes and sequence proteins. Unlike physicists, we talk a lot about the particulars and less about the great ideas. But there are great ideas in biology. The cell as the basic unit of life, the gene as the basis of heredity, evolution by natural selection, probably the greatest idea in all biology, life as chemistry, life as information, as I argued a few minutes ago. We should not swamp out these ideas by too many facts. Just look at your average university textbook on molecular, cellular, and developmental biology with over 1,000 pages of details, and you despair. And if we despair, what do you think happens to our students? We have to inspire our students, not simply turn them into walking encyclopedias. Today's facts are accessible very readily online, electronically, and increasingly they will become available through portals similar to Wikipedia. That means our teaching does not need to focus on facts as much as on how to retrieve those facts and on great ideas, so we can inspire our biology students and get the best students to take up our discipline. Great ideas are also important at school. It's crucial for pupils at school for them to understand what science is, in particular that it's the most reliable approach for acquiring knowledge about the natural world, including enhancement of understanding of ourselves. We need to communicate at school especially the core attributes of science: respect for accurate, reproducible observation and experiment, for consistency of explanations, respect for procedures that generate ideas and hypotheses capable of refutation, very important, capable of refutation, encouragement of skepticism, especially with respect to your own ideas. If there's one thing only I always teach my graduate students, is to be the greatest enemy of your own ideas. Not the greatest supporter, the greatest enemy. By being the greatest enemy, you end up being the greatest supporter. All citizens need to know how the scientific endeavour works. especially as democracy will increasingly require scientific and technologically relevant decisions, and biology in the 21st century will be central to this as well. So for those students with greater aptitude, however, we need to provide them with more. So we need to think about our schools. Everybody has to receive the basic education. Some may be attracted to science specifically. And for those that do have that aptitude and those interests, we really need to provide them with more practical experience, with more experience of experiments and observations. The drop in practical laboratory experience may be due to an unhealthy adherence to health and safety issues, needs to be reversed. I devised the yeast experiment for schools. I work on yeast. And they could not adopt it because it was a microbe and it was thought that this was dangerous, even though they eat and drink yeast all the time. It's crazy. It's truly crazy. I think that exposing our students with aptitude to experiment and observation is crucial. I think we need to have more placements in laboratories. I think research scientists like me need to recognize this, to reach out to schools and help to provide them with that experience. I also want to emphasize the important role of natural history. This is really the portal, the door, by which many, both at school and later, get interested in biology. David Attenborough here, wonderful series on natural history. They inspired me when I was a student. They continue to inspire generation after generation of students. And not only students, also adults who watch these wonderful programs. The general public is interested in natural history and through natural history biology, especially when there are great communicators like David. Natural history, and for that matter, simple observational astronomy, should be encouraged at school, and the great outdoors used as the natural laboratory. Every natural history study carried out by a student, whether at school or a university, can be unique. It is enormously stimulating for a school pupil to carry out a research project. I remember when I was at school mapping the spider webs in my garden and asking why the spiders' webs were where they were. And what I loved about it is I was discovering something new. Nobody else had ever mapped the spiders' webs in my garden. I don't think anybody mapped them after that either. And I was excited by it because not only did I make the observations, but I thought, why is a spider's web here or here? Why are they occupying certain places? I began to think about that. I became excited by it. Now, I accept I'm rather an excitable person, but many of us can get excited by such natural history projects. We need to have more of them at school. We need to promote natural history much more. So for education in biology in the 21st century, we need to achieve two things: an understanding and respect for science, including biological science, for all students, regardless of their ability or aptitude for science, to prepare them to be proper citizens in a scientific and technological world. And secondly, we need to provide inspiration at school for those who might want to make biology more central to their careers. And because biology is increasingly important, we need to attract the very best into the subject, and that's why we need to inspire them, and that's why, I return to it, we need to talk to them about the great ideas of biology. I want to turn now and finish on saying something about public engagement in science. I've already mentioned the increasing importance for democracy of having a public aware of what science is and who can then properly consider the implications of science and technology for society. Now, this is particularly important for biology concerning its interface with medicine and with the environment. because advances in biological research will continue to have great impact on what we can do, on what we are, and how we will view ourselves in the coming decades. There's 2 points I'd like to make here. The first is the importance of high-quality programming on TV and radio and articles in newspapers about science and biology in particular. It is important that this programming entertains as well as informing. It is important for it to be of high quality. And for that high quality to be achieved, we will need excellent scientific communicators, excellent scientific journalists. There's a rather disturbing reduction in scientific journalists, and we have to somehow reverse that. And we have to somehow, and I don't know how we do it, we somehow have to keep the headline writers under control. We shouldn't blame the scientific journalists for some of the terrible headlines that appear over their articles. This programming is vital to keep everyone informed and aware of what is going on, and it's also important to try and develop less confrontational approaches of two sides, especially when one side may simply be a non-starter. It's this sort of legal-inspired confrontational approach, so beloved by the Anglo-Saxon media, that can damage science and damage the discussion of science in the public. We cannot reduce these complex issues to sound bites, and they should not be subject to the forces of marketing. Look at the potential damage caused by the climate change skeptics, playing right into the hands of certain elements desperate to avoid reductions in energy usage. Just look at the debate that we've seen in the last months. Second point I want to make is the need for dialogue. By this I mean listening to the public rather than lecturing the public. Listening to what the public have to say, being aware of what they actually know, and being aware of their concerns. The role for dialogue is exemplified by the need to have good debates about these issues. And there's two examples I want to give you. One where it worked quite well, one where it did not. The success story, at least in the UK, but absolutely not in the United States of America, was of course the debate about stem cells. What this was characterized by in this country was an early identification of the issue, a generation of a debate that involved a range of interests across the public, so it wasn't dominated by single interest groups with fixed agendas, early attention from policymakers, and finally, really sensible guidelines and legislation, which, in this country at least, was generated and is now admired across the world. The failure, demonstrating how it can go wrong, was the GM debate about genetically modified crops. This debate was not driven by science, but by two forces, a marketing forces of a company and an ideology of a NGO, and it was this conflict that led to a poor outcome. The lesson to be learnt here that needs to be applied, I think, to all these issues in the future is the importance of identifying an issue early before opinions become set, by promoting dialogue with the public and understanding what views they have and why they have them. Many of the public did not want GM crops because they did not want to eat food with genes in their food. Now that's something us biologists could barely understand, because we obviously know all living things have genes in them. But why did we expect the general public to understand that? And they didn't understand it, and we as scientists didn't understand it because we never spoke to them. We never had the dialogue, we didn't talk to them, we didn't find out what they knew and what they didn't know. So the debate needs to be led by a broad range of society's interests, not by single interest groups. This debate became dominated particularly by Monsanto and the promotion of industrial promotion and marketing, and by more ideological objections, particularly from Greenpeace. And by the time the Daily Mail, which I believe is a newspaper, by the time the Daily Mail had its headline, Frankenstein Foods, the possibility for any further decent public debate was completely lost. And in my view, what was also lost, and tragically so, was a potential that this technology might help enhance food production and protect the environment, especially in the developing world. Only one, of course, GM crops are only part of that issue, but we've thrown one of them out of the window through this debate. Luckily, in China and India, they've taken up the baton and it will be carried out. But why could we not help them 10, 15 years ago? I'm very optimistic about biology in the 21st century, very much so. There's a great potential to understand life and what it is, this great intellectual endeavour. There is also great potential for huge benefits for humanity, to improve health, for wealth creation, for improving the quality of life. But we need to support research at the highest level. We need to improve our teaching. We need to have proper and better engagement and dialogue with the public. The 21st century will be the century for biology, and I wish the Society of Biology all the best, both in its own unification and with what it can do to ensure that biology is researched, taught, and discussed at the highest level and well. Thank you very much for your attention.
I first met David Attenborough quite a number of years ago at the Royal Society when I was the holder of a research fellowship, and David had just been elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society. And I remember his words to me, which were that he felt something of a fraud being elected to such a learned scientific society. He's nodding. I don't think anybody in this room would share that view, because there can be few who have done more to inspire people about the wonder of the natural world. And we're delighted he's agreed to come and say a few words to us today, squeezing it in before his next expedition to the Arctic. David, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. I understand that one of the important purposes of this new society is to produce and provide a unified voice for biology. That has never been more important, in my view. And actually, it need not be very difficult. In my experience, biologists are only too eager to communicate. I spend my time going around the world meeting research biologists, research zoologists, research ethologists in remote parts. And I have to say, sometimes I have a little doubt in my mind when I go and I'm going to meet a man who maybe has spent 25 years of his life living in the most difficult circumstances in some remote part of the African forest, watching a particular species of monkey, let us say. And a man comes from television and says, will you please show me what has taken you 25 years to discover, so that I can put it on television for 2 minutes. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if that research scientist didn't say to me, do you really think that I'm going to spend all that time, and I spend all that time, and I give it to you just encapsulated like that, so you can skim the cream and probably take the credit? I can honestly say that that has never once happened, not once. Every research biologist I've dealt with in the field, if he is convinced that you are prepared to relay what he's discovered honestly, seriously, carefully, and accurately, he's only too glad to give you that information. And I've been hugely grateful to those people. And I hope, in ways now, it's quite easy for us to give to those people every frame of vision, every frame of film. I was going to say, in these tape days, we don't use film so much, but everything that we record, we give to those scientists. And that can't be enough to repay what we in the media owe to those people. So this society has, among its members, the most generous of scientists. But what they have to say has never been more important. First of all, it's crucially important that this society representing biology should have the ear of government and speak with the power that comes from being a unified voice. Members of the government, politicians, are not necessarily well-informed biologists, but they have to deal with biological problems. They have to deal with the consequences of climate change, which are, in an enormous part, biological. They have to deal with problems like genetic modification of plants, which Paul just spoken of. They have to deal with problems about whether or not you kill all the badgers in this country, and what are the arguments. They have to deal with problems of public health, and particularly, again, echoing what Sir Paul said, they have to deal and take decisions about the teaching of biology in the schools, and there could scarcely be anything more important than that. So it is very important that biologists should speak with one voice, and that they will now enable to do so through the society. But of course, biology is not only important for politicians to know about, it's important for human beings to know about on a very personal level. The programs I produce have a small scientific content. I mean, seriously, a lot of it is natural history, but it is a joy to look at because people enjoy looking at the natural world. And that says something. That says something about the human spirit and so on. And what biologists can tell them about the way that life evolved, about the way in which we are here and the way in which we got here, is very important to every human individual. And you see it in its simplest form in the debate about intelligent creation, as they said, and about evolution. And I rate that as one of the most crucial things that human beings can understand about their own nature. But of course they have other problems to deal with in the natural world, which they have to make decisions about whether they have their children inoculated, about what they do about the natural world, about what climate change in terms of, for example, polar bears. Are polar bears going to become extinct? Does it matter? Is it important? All those kind of issues require an informed understanding of simple biological principles. So this society has a big job, but a job that is absolutely within its ability to fulfill. And that is to keep the government on the one hand and the public on the other informed about biological research, but fundamentally about the essence of biology, which tells us why we are here and also tells us what we ought to be doing here with the natural world. So I welcome the fact that the society now exists and can give biologists a unified voice. Thank you.
I can see why you're Michael Parkinson's most favourite interviewee. So our final speaker is Dr. Cerri Harrop from the Faculty of Life Sciences at the University of Manchester. And we selected Cerri because she won our Young Researcher Science Communication Award last year. Cerri is going to talk to us about engaging with the public and how it can rekindle interest in science. Cerri.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank sincerely the Society of Biology for inviting me to speak at this fabulous launch event. It really is a great honour to be here, so thank you. As Nancy said, I'm Cerri Harrop. I'm based at the University of Manchester. I'm part of a centre called the Wellcome Trust Centre for Cell Matrix Research. Now this is a 15-year-old schoolboy from Moss Side in Manchester, and this photograph was taken as part of our now annual Welcome to the Matrix event. It's, if you like, a celebration of science as a whole, and we run it every year during National Science and Engineering Week. We usually host about 150 students, and they come into the centre and work with researchers and learn science in a rather unconventional manner. Now, if I was to give a group of scientists a box containing, for argument's sake, plastic cups, polystyrene lids, maybe some pipe cleaners, and ask them to design and build a model to show how cells form tissues, or how cartilage is damaged in arthritis, or my own area of research, how the airways are damaged and how mucus production can cause real problems in health. First of all, that group of scientists would probably have to put the kettle on. We then plan, and we'd plan some more, and we'd design and redesign the model to within an inch of its life to make sure that it was spot on. Now, in stark contrast, if you give the same kit to a group of 15-year-old high school students, a little bit of input from a team mentor, within an hour and a half, the model's designed and built. They've not only done that, but they've written a talk about what they've learned, and they've also either written a song, or in some instances, even a rap about their particular area of research. So it's this enthusiasm that I think is a joy to really harness. So feedback from the event includes comments such as, I want to work in science in the future. I learned a lot. One of the comments from an event we ran last week was, I saw and learnt things I'd never have dreamed of in a million years. Well, that makes all the hard work and planning really pay off. And arguably, rather foolishly, another thing we do is we ask the students if the scientists that they've met and worked with, namely myself and my colleagues, met any previous ideas or expectations they might have had. Some of the comments back are like PR gold in many ways. No, I thought they were all old and mad was one I think that made our website. Another was, I thought scientists would be really strange. Admittedly, some are, but some of them are actually quite normal. So I think we have this kind of almost a responsibility, if you like, to kind of get out there and show what we're all about. But you'd be forgiven if you didn't know my background for thinking at this point that this is what I do for a living. I design and develop these kind of extracurricular interactive workshops for school students to learn about science. But that isn't what I'm paid to do at all. I actually work as a full-time postdoctoral researcher. And like I said, I'm based at the University of Manchester, where I'm currently developing a three-dimensional model of the human airways. Now, this is twofold, really. We take samples from patient volunteers themselves and use these to develop the model in order to, one, reduce and replace animals in medical research, and also, two, to better understand respiratory disease as a whole. So this, if you like, is my goal and my reason for being at the moment. And the success of my research project, and to an extent the success of my research career long-term, is measured almost exclusively on one output, and that is my publication record. That is the quality and quantity of peer-reviewed and accepted publications that I produce during the course of my research project. Now, in order to produce such a publication takes, hopefully, at least one good and original idea, a lot of planning and execution, and the production of reliable, reproducible data. Now, this inevitably is time-consuming. Now, with research being so time-consuming and time being so precious, why then do I dedicate some of my time to working with the likes of these school students? I could stand here and preach that it's taxpayers' money that pays our wages. So in actual fact, as researchers, we have almost a duty to tell the taxpayer just what we're doing with their money. Or I could make the point that it'd be really important and is arguably crucial that we develop a scientifically literate public who are empowered by science information gleaned from scientists themselves to make their own informed decisions. Or arguably more cynically, I could mention the fact that research councils and funding bodies these days ask specifically for scientists to engage at some level with the public. So therefore, in order to secure that next elusive research grant, what we actually need to do is run some kind of public engagement. Now, I believe that to assume that by scientists simply going out there and showing off their science to the public will enlighten, enthuse, and empower them is as unrealistic as it is patronizing. And it is, in fact, the public and these school students to which I owe my PhD, and also the fact that I'm still in research today, for it was during a particularly low point of my PhD when I'd spent months collecting and growing cells that then died for reasons I had no idea about, and running and rerunning experiments just to see them fail spectacularly and not be able to fathom what it was that was going so wrong. I received an email from the Manchester Museum, and the email was requesting that postgraduate demonstrators come and teach science, contemporary science, as part of their Life Lab programme. So I signed up for this, and working with young people who were learning brand new scientific techniques that were completely foreign to them, and seeing them genuinely enthused and inspired by working both on current science and working with real-life scientists, for want of a better phrase, re-inspired me, and about just how exciting it really is to be at the cutting edge of scientific research, to work with people from all over the globe, to travel, to explore new ideas and concepts, and to really take ownership of all of your ideas and your work and your data, and it's yours, and to own that and to be a part of this really is a most rewarding career. Now, research success may still ultimately be measured on publications alone, but the impact of a day spent working with the public, with their inquiring and inquisitive minds and their new ideas cannot be underestimated in its power to reaffirm to you just why your research is so important, both to yourself and to the public, and to relight that fire of enthusiasm that we all set off with in the first place. And who knows, along the way, we might even inspire scientists of the future. Thank you.
I think everybody here is wishing you good luck for the future, Cerri. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, the natural world does have, of course, great intrinsic value. And I think I think that needs to be recognized. And there's one wonderful argument for it, which also reflects unification. I'd just like to repeat that. One, of course, Charles Darwin's great discoveries was the tree of life. And you'll see that tree of life, the only illustration in the origin of species. And what that reflected, of course, is that all life is related to all other life, and that we are related to everything around us, every living thing. Now, I think one of the best arguments for the point you were making about respect is that we have a responsibility to look after our cousins. We are related to every living thing in the biosphere. We have a responsibility for that biosphere because everything there is related to us. And I think once you've got that into us, and it actually comes from understanding Darwin, genetics, and molecular genetics, it makes you think differently about all life around you. So I hope I've got the general gist of where you were going, and I think that I found that it's not actually it was an argument I first heard from Guido Pontecorvo, who some of you may know, a great geneticist of the last century. But I think it's a very, very powerful argument for respect for all life and why we should protect it.
I will add one further thing, if I may, to what I was saying about taxonomy, which I forgot to add. And that is, it's a very sad thing, in my view, but admittedly a necessary thing, that legislation should have been passed to prevent children from collecting things. It is now difficult to collect fossils. It is illegal to collect birds' eggs. It is illegal to collect butterflies, with one or two exceptions. And that seems to me a great loss. And I hope that we might be able to shift the legislation into a more intelligent and generalized way, and not to be so specific about collecting. There are still some things you can collect. You can still look at animals from the pond, thank goodness. And they in themselves are fascinating and teach you a lot about taxonomy. But the loss to our children of being prevented legally from collecting, I think, is a great loss.
The major stumbling block you come across is people's time is very precious to them. And, doing these kind of things is inevitably time-consuming. But by centralising a committee, which is chaired by myself and has everybody on it from our principal investigators to first-year PhD students, we almost facilitate and centralise any activity. So any ideas that are generated through the centre are put through, and we just spread the workload out. And people see other people getting involved, and because I'm coming at it from a research angle, people see that, okay, she's producing research, but she's also getting involved with these events. And other people, and it's kind of a snowball effect, really, but I think the committee has really sort of started to really get that off the ground.
So we have one more brief formal event. All of the members of the Institute of Biology who were either a member or a fellow or an honorary fellow were automatically transferred to the Society of Biology to become a member or a fellow or an honorary fellow of the Society. But we've yet to award our highest category of an honorary fellow to somebody new for the first time in the Society of Biology. And it seemed appropriate, with your blessing, that that first honorary fellow awarded should be Sir Paul Nurse. Paul. So it remains for me just to do a couple of things. First, to thank our fantastic speakers. I hope they have represented the breadth of interest and aspirations of the Society, and certainly they've informed and entertained us greatly. Thank you all, of course, for coming. But one of the things the Society of Biology is not is wealthy. And we are therefore extremely grateful for any donations. No, actually, we're very grateful to those who supported this launch. Most importantly of all is the Cone Foundation, who generously allowed us to have the funds to hire this wonderful venue and to support the event. And I'm delighted that Sir Ralph Cone is here this evening. Many of you will know Ralph as a renowned scientist, musician, and philanthropist, and it's a great pleasure that he's here with us today. I would also like to thank other sponsors, I won't go through them, but particularly Oxford University Press, Bioscientifica, and a number of our member organisations who supported this event. And finally, I have to tell you about the raffle. For the minute sum of £10, you can enter into the raffle to win either one of 10 signed copies of David's latest book, or an award-winning bottle of English wine. I think that's the 5th prize, probably. But I would encourage you to go and put your money into the raffle and your business card in, and you might be lucky enough to win a signed copy of David's book. So thank you all again. Thank you again to our speakers and our sponsors. And I hope you'll now enjoy the company, chat to friends, make new acquaintances, and celebrate the launch of the Society of Biology. Thank you all very much.
has a huge intrinsic interest in the biological sciences, in their nature, their applications, their implications. So for the British Science Association, we really welcome the creation of a society that can bring a coherent face to that presentation of the public and to inspire, engage, involve people of all ages and people in schools with the biological sciences and their applications.
Biology is at the heart of the future, both in terms of humankind and also the future of the planet. And bringing together the two major institutions in the biological sciences and in biology was a no-brainer. It had to happen.
All the big challenges at the moment, the environment, global health, aging population, have major biological components. It's really important that the first-rate biological community in the UK has a single strong voice to work with the Royal Society and the other parts of the scientific community to speak up for biology.